Today, we're very happy to have Dr. Patrick Quaid. He's an author of Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. He's also at the View Vision Therapy Clinics in Guelph and North York, Ontario. Also joining us today, Matthew Turton, who is the Director of Breakthroughs in Learning in Waterloo, Ontario. Welcome, both of you. What are the skills that need to be in place to learn to read effectively?
Oh, so many, and effectively is the key word. You can learn to read, but not read effectively. And I think that doesn't always get flagged in the classroom, where a lot of kids can read or sound good when they're reading out loud or seem to be able to pull content out, but they're not actually reading effectively. And that's really hard to catch. But there are a lot of different skills. There's kind of generally two different ways that we read a new word, which is visual memory or phonetically. And both of those make a lot of assumptions. I'll let Dr. Quaid talk about the visually side, because you have to have a lot of his systems in place in order to do that. From phonetics, you have to actually be able to quickly and easily hear the individual sounds within words. And that's something I struggled with growing up, where my personal least favorite phenome is O-U-G-H. It has like 6 different sounds. You sound like a caveman grunting, and they all sound pretty close and similar. And I struggled to hear the differences between those. And so when you tell that kid, we'll just sound it out, I wanted to punch you because I already did sound it out and it didn't help. And I would spell so poorly. Back in my day, we didn't have Google or Siri. I couldn't find the words in the dictionary. And so just telling me to sound it out was brought up a whole lot of negative emotions, that's for sure. But setting aside that, assuming that works well for a moment, the skills that you need to be a successful, efficient reader would be a very large sight word vocabulary, so that you can instantly recognize the majority of the English words that you're required to read. And that increases as you get older, or it specializes depending on your field of study as you move into post-secondary and things like that. You need good enough working memory to be able to hang on to the information that you're reading right now. You need good short-term memory to hang on to it there's lots of arguments in the literature of how short-term memory is, but the point is it's shorter than long-term memory. And then long-term memory to remember it for, of course, the long-term, for that exam or for the next chapter. Or, I'm reading a Tom Clancy novel right now, which is about 500 pages long. And I need to be able to remember some of the stuff from the beginning by the time you get to the end. And then on top of that, the ability to remember and imbue the characteristics, if we're talking fiction, of that character onto them later, right? Something that I've learned about that character, or I've imagined in my head. And that's a big part of fiction, right? Is you imagine what that character looks like. They tell you some of it, but you imagine the rest. So imagination is a big part. And an interesting one is background history, that really doesn't get talked about a whole lot. It's not a cognitive skill, but exposure. So if you read about a cow, trying to describe a cow is very difficult. But if I've seen or experienced a cow, my ability to visualize that, if you can visualize effectively, actually helps me to understand the text astronomically better than just a description of what a cow is. And there's about 11 or 12 different cognitive skills that we work on here at Breakthroughs that are all somehow related to reading. And it is a very complicated process. I think we just if you have a child that learns to read quickly and easily, we just take it for granted. As an adult, if you read well, you just take it for granted. You just look at the words and boom, you have their meaning. But there's an immensely complicated process involved there. And we just kind of assume that because I can read well, my child can read well, or that person over there can read well, and that's not always true.
That's absolutely bang on. And I think and to back up your point about it, that when it happens, it's so elegant when it just falls together. But Michael Early at Ohio State, so a shout out to Mike Early. So Professor Early is he's an optometrist. He's a PhD at Ohio State, but and he always jokes with me and says, I'm jealous of what you do. And I always joke with him and say, I'm jealous of what you do, because he does the neuroimaging of the equivalent of what we do in the clinic. So when we treat these visual deficiencies, and we're trying to get eye tracking and eye teaming and near far focusing and all these skills up and running in these children, what Mike is doing is he's doing neuroimaging research to say when somebody reads, what part of the brain lights up and in what sequence, which is just cool. I mean, he does diffuse tensor imaging, fMRI, all this really, really cool stuff. And in one of his lectures that he gave a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to see it. It was in the US, and he was talking about the planum temporale, which is a part of the brain basically where vision and hearing is combined. And his basic conclusion, if I could sum up his 2-hour lecture, which is one of the best I've ever seen, he said, mess with either one of them and watch reading tank. Because if you do not have consistent auditory input and consistent visual input and something to put it together, and even if it's if it's a phonetically regular word, that's fine. If it's a word like yacht, basically those sound and the picture come together, and depending on whether they match, and to your point, Matthew, about having prior experience, when memory comes into play to say, I remember what that word yacht stands for, a big fancy boat I'll never own. If it's not recognized, it gets sent to a different part of the brain. So his research is fascinating, but he made it very clear. He said vision lights up first, then auditory, then they're combined in a certain part in the brain. But he said if you mess with either one of them, the reading reflex will fail. And I think that was a really strong, powerful statement, because when I think about phonetics versus vision, phonetics is important. So the speech paths out there, I had speech path work done as a kid, and I need to understand that a B sounds like a B and a D sounds like a duh, and kids that have what I call the Charlie Brown effect, which is the wah 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 wah, like people are talking but I can't discriminate the sound difference. That's a real barrier to learning. But however, if you look at the neuroanatomy, at least 40% of the human brain is visual machinery. It's the largest sensory system. You've got about 1.2 neural connections called ganglion cells between each eye and the brain, and each ear is 30,000 connections. So you got 1.2 million, 30,000, big anatomy difference. So again, it's not saying that the other systems aren't important, but one of the things I often say to the parents who bring their kids into our clinic is the most important thing you can do for your child is get their hearing checked, get their vision checked in detail, make sure the visual skills are intact. And by the way, read to your child. So when the child is sitting in your lap, follow along with their finger or let them follow with their finger and read, because that's doing a couple of things. Assuming the kid can hear and see properly, they're seeing the symbols, they're hearing mom or dad call them out. And then if they don't know what it is, the mom or dad can explain, well, this is what this means. Here's a picture of an elephant. That's what the word elephant means. And with our daughter, Eileen, she's 8 right now. And we've done, my poor wife, she says, you're constantly experimenting with our child. Like, yes, I am, because I can. And what I used to do when I came home from work, I would have candies in one pocket and I'd have side cards in the other. And I'd just have a flash card where I'd flash the card at Eileen and say, what was the word? And if she got it right, she got a candy. So she's reading a storm. Her dentist is not very impressed, but she's reading up a storm. But what's really impressive is I read this book by Anthony and Alamanzo. The title of the book was Teaching Your Child to be Literate, a Reflective Approach. And in one section, they said there's 2 key points required for a child to become a good sight word reader. And by the way, Anthony Alamanzo is a PhD psychologist and a PhD speech pathologist. So there's no optometrist in this book. And they said the 2 key steps to getting your child to be a good sight word reader. And they said, by the way, all words eventually have to become sight words, not some, all. They said the 2 steps are, number 1, the child has to be able to detect the subtle visual differences in the words. Well, that's pretty hard to do if you have a vision problem. If it's going clear, blurry, or single, double. And the second step is they have to be able to recognize a word when it's flashed at them in a flashcard manner. So they're basically saying visual skills have to be intact and you have to be able to remember what you've seen. And I thought that was really interesting that they say those are some of the not the only ones. To Matthew's point, it's a complex picture, but they're some of the very, very key components that are required in order to allow a child to read without becoming frustrated. And these kids often appear very smart verbally. You can sit and have a really good conversation with them, and then you put print in front of them and they just fall apart. And the parents will sit there and go, I don't get it. My child is so smart when in everything except for school. It doesn't make sense. Well, I mean, if you take away the most dominant sensory system that you have, and you think about all these accommodations in the classroom, like talk to text, text to talk, they're all really designed to remove the child's ability to use their visual system. So when you look at the accommodations in that way, it really paints a pattern. So I think parents just being aware of watching for those patterns in your children, that the kids who don't like to read, they prefer to be read to. They're curious and smart, but when it comes to school, they're resistant to it. And in fact, about 60% of the symptoms of ADHD are the exact same symptoms of eye teaming disorders alone, even before you consider any other factors. So behaviorally, you might see these kids starting to act out. So I think that's a really important conversation.
I want to echo your comment there about children avoiding reading. As humans, especially young humans, before we're damaged, we enjoy doing things that we're good at. And if you have a child who avoids reading, that's a really strong indication that they feel they're not good at it or they are not good at it. And both of those are an indication that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you have a child that avoids reading to any degree, I highly recommend you get it checked out, because that's a very strong indication that they have some skills that aren't functioning well enough. And I often get asked, well, what's the most important reading skill? And my answer is all of them. It's like asking an aircraft tech, which is the most important part of an aircraft engine. All of them. They're all there for a reason, and same for reading. All those skills, they're all equally important. And if just one or two of them is not even disabled, but just not functioning optimally, it will catastrophically start to affect all of the other ones.
We've been joined today by Matthew Turton, who is the Director of Breakthroughs in Learning in Waterloo, Ontario. And of course, Dr. Patrick Quaid, View Vision Therapy Clinics in Guelph and North York, Ontario, the author of Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for having us.